Hello and welcome to another episode of the DigiTeacher, the first for 2025. Happy New Year. This week I'd like to look at student feedback databases. And right off the bat I have to say that I'm no big fan of big data. I think I'm quite suspicious of it. The whole movement towards education has to be run as a business, and running business as data-driven activity and all of that I think is very suspicious. Education happens socially by and large. We are social animals and we learn socially, and I think teachers' instincts for whole class instruction are very, very useful. So even though data can assist in personalizing learning, I don't think we want to travel that far down that path. We don't want to sort of build up huge databases, computer-driven models of this is how this person learns and this is how far they've come, and we know and we can track their progress exactly, and therefore we can tailor exactly what we give this person. Pestalozzi argued that the highest form of education was based on the individual tutor, and that is a hugely efficient model. Obviously, people are going to learn faster if you're receiving individual instruction. But as Vygotsky taught us, learning is also social, and I think there's a limit to what kind of data-driven personalization approaches can, and how far that can take us. So what do I mean by a student feedback database? Well, the idea kind of originated, I suppose, in the kind of 2000s, and it's a teaching approach that I kind of developed at that time, about 25 years ago now. Shows you how long I've been in the game. And I was just becoming a computer teacher at that time, but I was still largely an English teacher. So most of my classes were teaching English, but I was also teaching computer literacy. And I pulled a computer into my classroom, so I was one of the first teachers to have a computer in the classroom. And I started keeping records on the computer. And those records were largely based on students' progress. So as I noted something, I would jot it down and then add it to the database. And what this meant was that at a student-parent meeting, for example, I could take out my records and I could say precisely what was going on with that student. I was teaching a lot of English second language at that time, so my notes on a particular student were largely around their spelling is sound, their oral work is quite good, they're able to talk confidently and fluently, but they're having problems with, for example, Concord. So their tense and number and things like that isn't matching up exactly. And I would be able to feed that back both to students in terms of saying, well, this is what you need to work on. You're doing this really well, but you need to work on this aspect. And to parents to report on, well, this is what I'm working with your son or daughter. This is where we're kind of headed here. And I found that extremely liberating. But why was I doing it in the first place? Well, I think for the first part of my career as an English teacher, I was doing a lot of marking, a lot of assessment. I had big classes, about close to 40 in each class, sometimes even 50 in a class. They were handing in a lot of work and I was taking it home and I was marking it. And I was killing myself. I was really facing a lot of burnout. And then we had some personal development, and this guy came in and he was talking to us about the importance of not burning out, which I could immediately relate to, and of working smarter rather than working harder. And a lot of the ideas being thrown around were, for example, when you do your marking, you don't have to mark the whole thing. A student may have written a whole essay, but maybe you're only concentrating on marking the introduction. Or today you're only marking the conclusion and giving feedback to the student on that. So that helped reduce the kind of overall amount of assessment that I was doing, and that was a big help. But I was still taking home a lot of books and marking a lot of books. It was eating into my family time, and the overall trend towards burnout was continuing. So at a certain point I decided, okay, I'm not going to take any marking home. So I'll come in slightly earlier, I'll go home slightly later, but I'm not going to take any marking home. All my assessment is going to be done at school. Now, at that time, I was working pretty much every single period. I think in a week, for 35-minute lessons, I had 2 free periods, and a lot of that was spent fixing the computers in the computer room. So I didn't have a lot of time in school to work on assessment. So I decided, well, let me do it in class. And that was a total revelation to me. So the whole idea of you don't have to mark everything became, well, you don't have to assess every one at any one time. So typically a lesson would follow some kind of pattern, and the pattern might be you open up by either going over something that they've done or introducing something new, and you're explaining that, you're helping them to understand it, and then you're giving them an exercise that takes up at least half of the class time. And in that exercise they are practicing whatever skill that you've taught. They're consolidating it, or they're extending it, or they're exploring it. And when they're involved in that activity, typically you as a teacher would be walking around the classroom, you might be answering some questions, and you might be eavesdropping and intervening where you feel that you need to intervene. But a lot of that time is some kind of downtime. And as you're walking from desk to desk, you're able to clear your mind, and you're able just to step back a little bit, think about how the lesson has gone and maybe where it needs to go to finish it off. Some quick thoughts about what you're teaching next, because that class is coming in 10 minutes or what have you. And all of that downtime is well, it's not downtime really, because you're still monitoring the class and you're still intervening and answering questions and so on. But there is some kind of time that you could be using for assessment. So I decided, well, let me be more mindful about that. Let me carve out definite periods for assessment. So a big problem in teaching is any kind of personalized approach is that if you break it down, let's say you have a 30-minute lesson and you have 30 kids in your class. That means the maximum time you can spend with each student is 1 minute. And that doesn't really add to kind of meaningful exchanges. Now, you're going to have to do some kind of whole school instruction. You're either going over something that kids have done, or you are introducing new material, and that is going to take up at least half the period. So you end up with about 15 minutes with 30 kids. You've got 30 seconds for each kid, which is not very meaningful at all. So I decided, well, I'm teaching about, it's probably looking at something like between 5 and 8 or 9 30-minute periods a week with any particular class. So that means in a week, maybe I would be able to see each student for a more meaningful session. So I started introducing what I called hot seat sessions. So a hot seat session is once I've done my whole class instruction, and I've walked around and I've made sure the whole class is working on something, and I've answered kind of questions on it, I probably have about 10 minutes left in the lesson in which I can sit with individual students. So if I see 5 students, then in that lesson I've been able to spend at least 2 minutes, and that 2 minutes can be far more focused. So it's when I can say, okay, have your homework out. When I get there, you're going to show me your homework, and I go over the homework with you. I'm not going to mark the whole homework, but I am going to zero in, and it allows you very quickly to see particular errors that are emerging. I mean, one major thing might be that the kid hasn't done their homework. So you make a note of that and you discuss with the kid, why didn't you do your homework? Well, what is it that you can do to carve out some space, to have better time management? So you can have discussions around that. It might only be a 2-minute discussion, but you've interacted directly with the student about something which is a problem in their learning at that particular time. And then I would have a file in which I have a page for every student, and I would note down, okay, this is the discussion I've had. And I say to the student, I'm making a note about this, and you're going to work on this. So next time, we're going to see whether you've managed to do your homework, whether the strategies that I talked to you about, whether they've helped, and whether you're coping. So that would be one thing. Another thing might be the kid has done the homework, in which case you can go over it and you can say, okay, you did this well, okay, this is an error, you're not doing this okay. So you're doing this really well, but this is where the problem is, this is where you're going to have to work at. And you make a note of that in your file as well. And the kid is aware that you have made that note and that you are focusing on that. And they know basically what it is that they have to work on. And the next time you see that student, you can kind of, from your notes, you can say, okay, last time we were working on this, let's see if you're still making that error. No, you fixed it, well done. You're doing a lot better. There's still one mistake here. Oh, but now there's a different mistake that we can focus on. So it allows, even in a kind of 2 minutes that you've got for each kid, and you might not even be able to see every kid in every week. It might be over a fortnight period, but still it's much more focused and meaningful, direct personal contact that you've been able to make with a student. And you've got in your file, you've got a list, a note of these interactions, so that you know what you've discussed with the kid, and you know what they are focusing, what they're working on, and so that you can continue to focus until that improves, and you can set new goals. So what I mean by a database basically is a file of pieces of paper, essentially blank pieces of paper on which you keep notes. Now you can digitize that. So what I used to do is I used to regularly take my files and make a summary of the notes. And that summary becomes the basis of any report, comments, or feedback to parents. So what is it this term that we've been working on? Well, we've been working on oral fluency. The kid just doesn't like to speak, and what strategies can we put in place? And they have problems with concord, and they have problems with spelling. And this is what we've been working on. Where are they very strong? Well, when they do write, they are actually able to tell a story really well. They've got good structure and so on. So you have kind of quite extensive notes that are on any student that you are able to keep and use for feedback to the student and to parents for assessment and any other purposes that you need, creating reports and so on. So that's what I mean by a feedback database. And the way that I've kept this usually is at the beginning of the year I create a file for each class in which I set up that document, usually with the student's photograph from the school management system, which helps me in the beginning of the year to recognize the kids. I can look at the photo and say, okay, that's you, and when you're sitting with the kid you consolidate your facial recognition and all of that. So it really helps in the beginning. And I also think it helps create a personal relationship with the student. They feel more seen because you are talking to them about particular things, not just marking in red and handing it back and hoping that they read that, but you are also talking to them about your feedback. Does that mean all your marking and assessment has to be in class? No. You can also do assessment outside of the class, put it in the file, and when you see the student for the next hot seat, you can say, okay, over the last week or so I've marked this assignment and that assignment, and this is what I noticed in your writing. So you can kind of talk to them about that as well. It doesn't all have to be in front of the student, although I think doing it in front of the student is a huge help, and I really would recommend that. So in terms of the digital file that you keep, you can either just use it to create a file that you print out and keep in a file book with the kid's photo and their name and then blank lines that you fill in, or you can actually summarize what the notes that you're keeping in your file when you're talking to students and giving feedback to students and doing the assessments. You can summarize that in a digital copy of that file, which can then go forward to the next year. So if you teach the same student over multiple years, you have a kind of a record going back a couple of years of, well, a couple of years ago, this is where you were, and look where you are now. And you can do that kind of thing in your conversations, your hot seat conversations with students. So this quite simply is what my database looks like. I set this up in a Word document, and I can copy it from year to year and just change the names and the years and the classes and that kind of thing. The photos I bring in from the school management system and just paste in place, or you can take a photograph and just attach it, even staple it on. You can go really low tech with this, and then you can use this as in a file as a form of notes. What I think is effective about this is, in a traditional database, you would be setting up particular fields. So you're collecting data on specific things. A database has to be set up that way, whether you're running it in Excel or in Access or whatever system you're using. But just by having blank lines, you're able to create fields, new fields on the fly, as you find out new things about a student. You don't have to collect the same data on everyone, because not everyone's the same. Some people, some things are really important and others are not important, and that changes from individual to individual. So I think this is a much better way of keeping data on students. Just a blank piece of paper, really, just lines that you fill in. If you've never tried this before, I would urge that you do so. I think it might revolutionize your practice. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and share and comment. Let's exchange ideas. Let's talk about what approaches have you used to data, what kind of data you collect on students. I have to apologize for the sound quality of this video. I'm not teaching computing this year, I'm just teaching English. I have a new role in the school as a data analyst, and then I have English classes as well. So totally new thing for me, and I've moved out of my office in the computer center, and I'm now set up in a pokey little office on a back stair somewhere, and you can hear the reverberation and so forth. I'm going to need to get better sound quality. The whole idea behind these videos was to be totally authentic, just to record if there were interruptions. My creaky door banged halfway through. I had to keep the window open to allow air in, otherwise I would suffocate, and you could hear noises from the courtyard just downstairs. The whole idea is to be authentic and noisy, and not to spend a lot of time or a lot of equipment and money, but just to be able to communicate my thoughts when I have it. So I'm not going to apologize too much, but apologies for the poor sound quality. And I'll see you next week for another episode of the DigiTeacher.